Imagine yourself ready to embark on a journey, expecting a smooth flight, when a passenger beside you starts disrespecting and humiliating one of the flight attendants just because of her appearance. She, professional to the last second, tries to handle the situation without losing her composure, but the tension builds with each cruel word. The situation reaches its limit, until the flight captain, observing everything, takes an unexpected action that changes the course of the story. What would you do in her place? Will the passenger get away with it? To find out the outcome of this impactful story, subscribe to the channel, like, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Every flight is a new challenge, and I admit, a mix of anxiety and excitement. My name is Maya, I'm 29 years old, and I'm a flight attendant. Today I have a good feeling about this flight, as if it's another step toward achieving my dreams. But part of me still gets butterflies before dealing with so many strangers. There's always the chance of encountering someone who challenges not only my patience but my dignity. Since I was a little girl, I dreamed of traveling and seeing the world. I'd look at photos of places that seemed otherworldly, landscapes I never imagined could exist outside of movies. Becoming a flight attendant gave me the chance to see these places with my own eyes and, more than that, to work at something I truly love. But of course it's not all smooth sailing. Over the years, I've had to deal with all types of people and situations. Some are easy, almost go unnoticed. Others, however, leave marks that are hard to ignore. Sometimes it's the physical fatigue from hours of standing. Other times it's the emotional exhaustion from dealing with attitudes that go way beyond just having a bad day. Today, I feel my career is in a good place, but the pressure to always meet expectations is constant. My team relies on me, and I know that as the chief flight attendant on this flight, I have to keep calm and maintain my composure. It's my responsibility to make sure everything goes smoothly, that everyone follows safety protocols, and that the passengers feel comfortable. You know, I really take pride in serving people well. There's something special about watching someone sit down on a plane, nervous or tense, and then relax because they feel they're in good hands. Each thank you at the end of the flight, every smile when handed a glass of water or an extra pillow, it all makes it worth it. But there's something many don't understand. Being a flight attendant doesn't mean I accept everything in silence, that I stay quiet in the face of injustice or disrespect. I also have my pride, my dignity, and I fight to keep my professional composure, even when I feel like I could lose my temper. Today, as I walk through the aisle checking preparations, I notice how some passengers are already settled in, others are still organizing their luggage, and some stare at their phones, oblivious to what's going on around them. But I notice everything, every detail. A mother tries to calm her young child by the window, an elderly woman adjusts her glasses to read the safety card, and a young man gazes out the window, fascinated. In this profession, I've learned to observe people. It helps to anticipate situations and prevent small issues from turning into major headaches. But there's a specific group of passengers that always gives me a sense of apprehension. Those who believe that because they're paying, they have the right to treat others however they like. This type of person is everywhere, but on an airplane where space is limited and the stress of being in the air can be heightened, it becomes more complicated. They're the ones who look at me and see only a flight attendant, as if I'm here solely to serve them and nothing more. I've learned to recognize the look, the tone, even the posture. They think their word is law, that they can disrespect me without consequence, but still, I try to brace myself to handle these situations with firmness and grace. While making the final adjustments, I mentally go over the list of procedures. In case of emergencies, we know exactly what to do. The rules are etched in my mind: how to assist a passenger in distress, how to respond to panic situations. But what about when the emergency is human behavior itself? How do I respond to prejudiced attitudes that hurt and challenge me, yet aren't visible in any safety manual? No one teaches us exactly how to deal with that, and each flight can bring a new version of this challenge. But I have my tricks. When someone crosses the line, I take a deep breath and imagine my dignity as an invisible coat that protects me from aggression and insults. That way, I keep my composure and continue with the service, focusing on the passengers who truly deserve my attention. And when the flight ends and the last passenger disembarks, that invisible coat helps me leave behind the harsh words and cruel attitudes I sometimes encounter. I try to focus on the passengers who treat me with respect, on moments of gratitude and smiles. That's what gives me the strength to face each new flight. Today, however, there's something different in the air. A premonition. As I watch each passenger take their seat, I try to shake off this strange feeling and focus on what I can control. Flight after flight, I remind myself that my mission is to ensure everyone arrives safely and feels welcomed and respected. But deep down, I know that each flight has the potential to teach me something new, about others, about the world, and especially about myself. As I position myself by the cabin door, I exchange glances with my colleagues, who share the same sense of purpose and nervousness. Today's crew is solid, and I know I can count on them should anything unexpected happen. So, with a smile and a confident posture, I welcome the next passenger, opening the way for yet another journey. And I'm ready. Or at least that's what I try to convince myself. It was right after boarding that I noticed the look of that man. He had an air of superiority, as if everything and everyone around him were mere accessories for his comfort. He was the type who occupied space with arrogance, with broad shoulders and a rigid posture. He barely looked around, and when he did, it was with an air of disdain. At the first opportunity, I tried to be cordial. "Sir, could you please store your luggage to make room for others?" He looked at me with contempt, his gaze cold and intense, muttering something I preferred not to fully hear. But the tone left no doubt. It was as if he was saying I shouldn't even be speaking to him. I felt slightly taken aback, but I kept my composure, smiling, forcing myself to ignore the tightness already starting to form in my chest. This passenger, Richard, seemed like someone who would be difficult to deal with. And I was beginning to suspect that this impression wasn't just paranoia. There was something in the air that already made me uneasy, a sense that the worst was yet to come. But, as always, I opted to think positively. Maybe he was just having a bad day? Maybe, after a bit of rest, his mood would improve? Unfortunately, I was wrong. As he stored his bag, slowly and irritatingly taking up more space than necessary, I heard a slight provocation. "Poor service as always. We pay a fortune and get the bare minimum. And of course with this crew?" He looked directly at me, and his gaze said everything the words didn't need to. It was a look meant to belittle me, to make me feel small. At first, I tried to rationalize. This had happened before, it wasn't new. People take out their frustrations on others, especially on those there to serve them. After all, there are those who believe flight attendants are little more than servers in the air. But at that moment, I was already beginning to feel my body tense, my breathing a bit faster. I reacted with a discreet smile, denying him the satisfaction of seeing that his words affected me, and continued helping other passengers get settled. A few minutes later, as I passed through the aisle again, I noticed Richard was still arranging his things. He wasn't in a hurry, as if it didn't matter that he was blocking the passageway. He seemed to enjoy the idea of making others wait. And every time I got close, his gaze cut through me, examining every detail of my expression, as if he were looking for a flaw. "Sir, I need you to finish storing your luggage and take your seat so we can proceed with the preparations," I said in a firm but polite tone. It was the third time I had passed by, and he remained in the same spot, ignoring the instructions and blocking the aisle. He ignored me for a few seconds, finishing adjusting his bag in an unnecessarily slow manner. Then he turned to me and, in a dry and condescending tone, said, "Haven't you noticed yet that I'm not in a hurry? You're the one working here, not me. And honestly, this job of yours, I don't understand how they hire people with no experience to deal with the public." It felt like a punch to the gut. I struggled to keep my face impassive, but inside I felt anger rising. How could he be so disrespectful and aggressive? And why with me? Even after years of working with the public, I've never gotten used to hostile, unprovoked treatment. Dealing with demanding passengers is part of the routine, but there's a difference between demanding and disrespectful. And he was clearly crossing that line. Some of the nearby passengers were watching the scene, with looks of disapproval directed at Richard. In situations like these, the presence of others is both a support and a pressure. Knowing they were watching, I wanted to show professionalism and strength, but I also worried that someone might interpret my response as a lack of patience. "Sir, I'm here to ensure your safety and comfort," I replied, trying to sound firm. "But for that, I need you to follow safety instructions." He raised an eyebrow, showing a smirk of scorn. "Safety? Sure." And he turned away again as if my presence was an annoyance. A drop of sweat rolled down my forehead. I kept smiling, but I felt the tension in my muscles, my jaw clenched. Inside, I wondered, how far would he go? The feeling of being humiliated, even in public, was hard to ignore. I felt a strong urge to respond in kind, but I knew that would only get me into trouble. Instead, I took a step back, deciding to keep my professionalism. The last thing I wanted was to lose control and escalate the situation. I took a deep breath and stepped away, promising myself I wouldn't let that man ruin my day. But something told me he wasn't finished yet. I took a deep breath, focusing on keeping my composure. But what he said next caught me by surprise. "You should know your place. I paid to be here and you're here to serve. Nothing more." It was like a punch. My face must have shown the impact those words had caused, because I saw a gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. He wanted to destabilize me. He wanted to see if he could break my composure. But I knew that, above all, I needed to keep it together. The last thing I wanted was to let him see me shaken. So, I took a deep breath and responded, with a firm yet calm voice. "Sir, I am here to ensure your safety and comfort, but that requires mutual respect." He gave me a cynical smile, as if my answer was exactly what he wanted to hear to keep going. I felt the eyes around us, curious and attentive passengers, some exchanging concerned glances, others perhaps frustrated with the situation unfolding. I knew I had to resolve this quickly, but nothing in my experience or training had prepared me to deal with someone so intentionally cruel. He shook his head as if he were witnessing something ridiculous, then spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's amazing what they call professionalism these days. And this so-called mutual respect. Since when do flight attendants decide how to talk to me? I'm the customer, aren't I? Who are you to tell me what I can or cannot say?" The weight of his words fell on me, along with the gaze of the other passengers. A mix of anger and helplessness washed over me. I knew I was being tested, and I also knew that anything I said or did at that moment could be used against me. I felt my hands tremble slightly, but I didn't allow myself to show weakness. He wanted to intimidate me, to put me in my place, the place he thought I should occupy. I tried to recall all the instructions we'd received about staying calm and neutral in conflict situations. But it's never easy when words sting like barbs. All the pride and love for my job, the dedication and sacrifices I'd made, all of it seemed to be reduced to nothing in the face of the contempt he showed. But at that moment I stood tall, keeping my expression calm, though I felt my heart racing. "Sir, I understand you have expectations for the service," I replied, trying to choose each word carefully. "And I am here to ensure that everyone has a safe and comfortable experience. If there's anything we can do to improve your experience, I'd be happy to assist." He laughed, a dry laugh, undisguised in its disdain. "Oh, is that it now? Improve my experience? Then why don't you start by respecting your role? Respecting the fact that it's your job to serve me? Or did no one teach you to respect a customer?" I felt a pang in my stomach. He wouldn't stop testing me, provoking me as if he wanted to see how much I could endure. And I knew that, if I lost control, he would get exactly what he wanted. But each word cut a little deeper, like a series of small blows. He was there, attacking my dignity, my dedication, my position. Everything that defines me, everything that makes me a dedicated and honorable professional, seemed to crumble under that cold, cruel gaze. I looked around and noticed that some passengers were watching, their expressions oscillating between disapproval and solidarity. An older woman, seated nearby, gave Richard a disapproving look, while a young man across the aisle gave me a subtle nod of encouragement. That gave me the strength to continue. I wouldn't let him bring me down. I was proud of what I did, and I knew I was there to ensure everyone's safety and well-being. That, unfortunately, included someone like him. But he didn't stop. "Maybe you should consider another career if you can find something better." He laughed, and the cold chuckle echoed in my ears. Each word seemed intended to belittle me. Part of me wanted to scream, but the rational part knew this was the final test. He was provoking a reaction. He wanted me to lose my temper. I took a deep breath and took a step back, saying only, "If you need any assistance, I'm here to help." Then I moved away as far as I could, with my heart still pounding. In situations like this, the best approach is to keep your distance and avoid any kind of escalation. However, I sensed he wasn't ready to let it go. Deep down, I knew he would continue finding ways to provoke me. As I walked to the service area, I felt a tightness in my chest and a strange heaviness in my legs. I couldn't let this affect the rest of the flight, but his words still echoed in my mind. "You should know your place." It was as if he was trying to reduce me to the bare minimum, as if I had no worth. And even though I knew he was wrong, even though I knew I had every right to feel dignified and respected, something about him made me doubt. It was a psychological game and he was winning. When I returned to the cabin to check the final details before takeoff, I noticed that Richard was watching my every move, almost as if he was waiting for the next chance to provoke me. I felt my heart clench, but I couldn't let him see any insecurity in my eyes. After all, I knew he thrived on fear and submission. The situation was already unbearable and I was about to lose control. The tension in the air was palpable, and each word from Richard felt like another attack. But then, suddenly, I saw Captain Ethan approaching. He was coming down the aisle with his upright posture and the impassive expression of someone in charge, but there was something in his eyes that immediately made me feel calmer. He looked me in the eyes as if to say, "I understand. You're not alone." It was as though time had slowed for a second, and all of my anxiety and the pressure I was feeling began to ease, just from his presence. Richard, who seemed so sure of himself, didn't notice the captain approaching until Ethan was already right next to us. He stopped beside Richard and, without shifting his gaze from the passenger, said in a calm but absolutely firm voice, "Sir, respect is a fundamental rule on our flight. And those who do not follow the rules simply cannot remain on board." Those words hit like lightning. Suddenly, the weight of the situation seemed to shift. I saw Richard freeze, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to process what he had just heard. His reaction was instantaneous, but not as imposing as he had imagined. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but the captain interrupted him before he could even form a word. "You do not have the right to disrespect the crew, sir. And I will not allow your behavior to affect the safety of other passengers." I was so stunned that, for a moment, I couldn't even breathe properly. A tremendous relief flooded my chest. For the first time on this flight, I felt that someone truly had my back. The fear, frustration, and helplessness started to dissipate. The pressure that had been weighing on me disappeared like a wave retreating to the sea. The captain wasn't just defending me, he was defending what was right, what was just. And more than that, he was doing it authoritatively, without hesitation. Richard looked astonished. He stared at the captain as if trying to understand the magnitude of the situation. Suddenly, he no longer seemed so sure of himself, so arrogant. He searched for words, but his tongue seemed tied, unable to articulate whatever he was trying to say. The atmosphere around us became tense with silence, and I could feel the passengers' eyes on us. Some, like the older woman who had given me a disapproving look earlier, exchanged approving glances. Others were simply waiting, curious about how the situation would unfold. But it was in this moment that something touched me deeply. The captain's presence was not just a relief for me, but a validation that, yes, I was in the right. I knew that everyone's dignity should be respected, but we always doubt our ability to demand that when we're alone. And now, with Ethan there, I not only felt protected but also recognized. For the first time on the flight, I truly felt seen. Richard, realizing there was no way out, tried to make one last move. "You can't throw me off like this. I have rights as a passenger. I'll sue you for this." But the captain didn't let himself be intimidated. His response was calm but authoritative, as if there were no room for questioning. "You have the right to be treated with respect, but you also have the duty to respect others. Now, either you leave the aircraft voluntarily, or we will have to call security to remove you. The choice is yours." It was almost a surreal situation. I expected a more dramatic reaction, a fiercer resistance. But instead, Richard seemed to realize that the captain wasn't playing a game, and that the decision had been made. He looked around once more with an expression of disdain, but without another word. The anger in his eyes was still there, but it no longer held any power. He stood up with difficulty, but not before giving one last challenging look to the captain as if saying, "This isn't over." Meanwhile, I stood frozen, unsure whether I should move or simply watch the scene unfold. It was as if a pressure I hadn't even known I was feeling had been lifted from me. The captain didn't move. He just watched Richard with the calm of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. When Richard finally moved away, Ethan turned to me, and something in his gaze made me feel a wave of gratitude so strong I almost didn't know how to express it. He hadn't just intervened. He had made me feel that my work, my dignity, and my emotions mattered. "Are you okay, Maya?" he asked with an unexpected gentleness. I could only nod, my heart still racing. "Yes, thank you, Captain." I didn't know what else to do. He gave a gesture of understanding and flashed me a brief smile, almost like a promise that, if necessary, he would be there again. "You did everything right. Don't let anyone make you feel less than you deserve, okay?" I smiled, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The feeling of being supported, of knowing I wasn't alone, was more comforting than I had imagined. The captain had intervened with the necessary authority, but also with the respect that every human being deserves. As Richard was escorted off the aircraft, I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief, with the feeling that even in a moment of extreme tension, justice had prevailed. And, more importantly, I felt that my dignity was intact. Richard still tried to argue, but Captain Ethan's voice didn't falter, and his posture remained unshaken. He had already made his decision, and there was no room for discussion anymore. With a firm look, he repeated, "It's not negotiable, sir." The tone left no doubt, and it was clear that there was no possibility for negotiation or resistance. Richard seemed to realize this, but his pride pushed him to fight until the very last moment. I, standing beside them, watched everything with my heart racing. My hands were a little trembling, and for a moment, I didn't know if it was because of nervousness or the emotions taking over me. It was hard to believe that everything was happening so fast. The man who had humiliated me so cruelly, who had made me question my dignity, was about to be kicked off the plane. Richard began to stand up slowly, his face red with anger, his eyes still throwing that look of disdain. He tried to look at the captain one last time, as if still searching for a loophole, some point where he could contest. But Ethan didn't waver. The decision was made, and his firmness was stronger than any resistance Richard could present. The murmurs of the other passengers began to intensify, a mix of disapproval and, in some way, approval as well. I heard some low words whispered between them, but I couldn't understand clearly. What I perceived was the change in the cabin's atmosphere. There was now a sense of relief, as if something was being set right. The looks that had once been directed at Richard with some hesitation or even fear were now filled with a different energy, an energy of relief. To me, that felt like a quiet victory. Richard's footsteps echoed down the aisle, and I couldn't look away. He, who not long ago had seemed so sure of his position, was now being escorted to the door with behavior that was, at the very least, embarrassing. He still tried to protest, but his words were lost in the air. The captain walked beside him, maintaining a professional demeanor but not making any effort to pay attention to Richard's attempts to reverse the situation. He was there to ensure order, and he was fulfilling his role. When Richard finally passed through the door, I couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. The cabin fell into an almost reverent silence for a moment. And then, like distant thunder, the murmurs of approval began, more subtle and discreet than I had imagined, but present. An elderly lady in the row behind me, who had seemed more severe earlier, now looked at me with a discreet smile, as if saying, "You did right." It was strange how small human interactions could give us so much relief and strength. I felt my eyes well up, and I couldn't stop it. It was a rare and powerful feeling of justice. It wasn't just Richard's humiliation being corrected, but my own validation. Feeling that I wasn't the one in the wrong, that my effort to stay calm, to not give in to the provocations, had been worth it. I felt that I was finally worthy of the respect that many sometimes try to take away from us just for existing. The captain's stance not only restored order, but it also restored my confidence. Up until that moment, everything I knew about respect and dignity had seemed like a distant concept. an idea that only existed in books or some idealistic speech. But in that moment, with Richard being escorted out, I realized that it was indeed possible to do things the right way, even in such a tense situation. And more importantly, I realized I deserved to be treated with respect, not because I was trying to prove something, but because it is what every human being deserves. "Are you okay, Maya?" Captain Ethan's voice cut through my thoughts, bringing me back to the present. I looked at him, still with my heart racing but now calmer, more centered. He looked at me with the same serenity as before, but with a slight touch of empathy that made all the difference. He knew that this experience hadn't been easy, but he was there, present by my side, and that made all the difference. "Yes, Captain. Thank you so much," I managed to reply, my voice almost trembling but filled with gratitude. I didn't know what else to say. The words seemed small in light of everything that had just happened. The captain nodded, once again with that subtle smile, but one that spoke more than any words. He seemed to understand the impact of that intervention, and I knew he understood the depth of what had just happened, not just for me but for everyone involved. As the murmurs around us subsided and the passengers calmed down, a feeling of reclaiming took over me. The flight would continue, yes, and we would head to the final destination, but there was something in me that had changed. I was no longer the flight attendant who passively accepted someone's attacks. I was someone who had the right to be respected just like anyone else. And in that moment, I realized that what happened there wasn't just a boarding incident. It was about taking ownership of one's dignity, facing discomfort, and finally being recognized for who we are. When the flight finally resumed its course smoothly and Richard was no longer in sight, I was able to breathe deeply, allowing the weight of the emotions to lift a little. The cabin was in a comfortable silence, the passengers settling back into their seats, and although the incident was still fresh in my mind, there was a different feeling in the air. It was as if a weight had been lifted from all of us, as though, in some way, the flight had gained a new energy. It was then, just before takeoff, that Captain Ethan approached me in the galley. He seemed calm, but his eyes showed a slight intensity, as if he was waiting for the right moment to speak to me. When he finally turned to me, his eyes reflected a bit of the seriousness of the situation we had just lived through. "Maya?" He paused as if carefully choosing his words. "I only did what was right. You deserve respect. Always believe that." Those words, spoken with such firmness and sincerity, hit me deeply. I already knew he was doing the right thing, but hearing it from him after everything that had happened was a kind of reconciliation I didn't even know I needed. He gave me a simple smile, but one so genuine it almost made me lose control. A smile from someone who knew they had made a difference. He made me believe even more that we all can play a part in the fight for a better world. "Thank you, Captain," was all I could respond, my voice shaky. It wasn't just a thank you for his support in that moment, but for something deeper. He helped me remember my own dignity, to believe in my voice and my ability to react in the face of adversity. Those words, "You deserve respect," were an important reminder, perhaps the most important one, for me to never again allow anyone to diminish me, no matter the context or the person involved. The rest of the flight continued smoothly, but something within me had transformed. It wasn't just the feeling of having overcome an embarrassing situation, it was the certainty that I had conquered something much bigger. I had reaffirmed my place in the world, my dignity. Richard may have left that flight, but what he didn't take was what I now carried with me. A renewed confidence not only in my work but in my ability to face any challenge, any prejudice. Time passed quickly that day, and when we finally reached our destination, I couldn't help but think that this experience, as challenging as it had been, was a valuable lesson. It wasn't just about an intolerant passenger being removed from a flight. It was about how, with support, we can deal with situations of injustice. How often the true struggle isn't just about defeating the other, but about gaining our own peace and confidence. I knew that, throughout my career, other challenges would arise. Other passengers with disrespectful attitudes, other complicated situations. But what I learned that day was that we don't have to do it alone. Support can come from unexpected places, from someone like Captain Ethan who showed through his actions that things can be done the right way. I felt different as I got off the plane. Stronger. More aware of my worth. And that gave me renewed hope, not only for my work but for life. I truly believe that, together we can make a difference, one step at a time, one flight at a time. If we all seek dignity and respect, not just for ourselves but for others, who knows what we can achieve. That experience transformed me. It taught me that challenges and prejudice do not need to define who we are. We are the ones who define who we are. And with that in mind, I left that flight with a new commitment to myself, to never again allow anyone to make me feel less than I deserve. Not that day nor any other day. I didn't yet know what the next challenge I would face would be, but something told me that, with the right support, I would be more than ready for it. And you? Have you ever been through something similar, or know someone who faced a situation of prejudice and injustice? Share your story in the comments, we want to hear from you. And if you like this story, like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Remember, respect and dignity are for everyone. Let's make a difference together.